Hi everyone, and welcome to another little video from Firewriter. I'm Cherry and it's lovely to be here today, and we're going to be talking about tips. Tips are the paintbrush for the pyrography machine, and the one thing that a lot of people get really confused about. Right, before we look at tips, let's have a look at two basic kinds of machines that you can buy. This one here is a wire tip machine, sometimes called a hot wire, and the name kind of gives it away. So you've got a little wire that comes out. All of these are wire tip machines, and you can undo them and change the post. This is interchangeable tip post of a Firewriter. And the other type of machine that you can get, which makes a big difference with your tips, is a solid point machine. These guys tend to have a huge chunk of metal on the end. They take longer to heat up and cool down. You can get lots of marks out of them, but they're not as flexible as these guys here. Some artists though love using them and create amazing and fabulous work with them. I tend to use this. This is my grunt machine, I call it, and I tend to use this for dark backgrounds and like really heavy dark marks. It's brilliant for that. And if you're looking at the tips for these, they tend to come like almost like little stamps with your set. And there's lots of different ways they change. This one just pulls off and goes back on. But do make sure when you're changing any tip that the machine is switched off and cooled down. And this guy holds heat for a long time. So let's have a look at some of the tips for the wire machines. So tips can be really confusing for a beginning pyrographer. So let's have a look at a few. One of the most common tips that tends to come with your machine when you first get it is the writing tip. This is typically a nice soft end, but it can come in another multitude of shapes and sizes, but they all basically do the same thing. So this is a little, you might see it before, it's called a little ballpoint, and it looks like the end of a ballpoint pen. That's the basic writing tip. And this little guy is known as a stylus. Can you see that? This is really cool for very tiny little marks, very thin writing, and yeah, it can be a little tricky one to use, that one. So next to the writing tip, we have a skew tip. A skew tip is the tips that you see that look a little bit like a knife blade. So they've got a short characteristic end here that's like really sharp, and they're one of the few blades or tips that go into the wood. They actually enter into the wood when you're burning. All of the other ones should be hovering over the wood, making sort of nice smudgy marks. Next to the skew tip, we have the shading tips. Shading tips tend to come in two types. You get a spoon shader, given away by the characteristic spoon bowl on the bottom. And we have my favourite of all things, a spear shader. Spear shaders are designed to actually just sit on the wood, and you kind of move them around. One thing to note as well when you're using these kind of guys is you can see from the bottom of them they actually have a lot more metal in them than this guy. And so by having more metal in these, they will draw more current. So you'll often see, particularly if you're using a Razertip system, this red area here, that indicates that that's a heavy duty cable, because the thicker the tip, the more they draw. This black one here is a normal cable, which I tend to use on the writing tip. If I'm using any of the shaders, I'll always switch to a heavy duty cable. It saves it heating up. And a word of warning as well before you start playing with tips is to make sure that the machine that you're using is capable of drawing extra current. So if you're not sure, refer to the manufacturer's instructions. So let's have a look at the tips a little bit more closely. So this is your basic writing tip. Best thing to do is when you have any new tip is to have a play. I always get a little sampler and I just play with the tips just to see what marks you can create, and you'd be really surprised by just that little shape what you can create with that. You can create straight lines, you can create dots, circles, stars, anything that you like. It all just takes a little bit of practice. And the nice thing with writing tips is the smooth, nice curves. With a little bit of practice and time, you can create things like these. All of these have been done with any basic writing tip. Skew tips are the tiny, knife-shaped edges of the Pyro world. They create wonderful, sharp, precise lines, and I really like using them. They're fabulous for cross-hatching on illustrative shadings, and they can do lazy, sinuous curves. The interesting thing about skews is they're the only tip to actually pierce the surface of the wood, albeit gently. Watch your temperature though when using skews, as you can easily blow out your line because the tips get very hot due to their small surface area. They can also become really weak when they're hot, so treat them gently and don't force them into any tight curves. With a little bit of practice and a bit of playing, here's some I produced earlier. All of these have been produced by a skew tip. Okay, here is the spear shader. I think this is one of the most versatile tips to use. Well, for me personally, everybody finds something a little bit different. But what I like about this guy is that you kind of have the flexibility of a skew on the side, and you also have the tip. You be very careful, you can use the tip and the base too. So you have three different types of tip in one if you learn how to use it. So you can use the sides pretty much like on here. You see how similar that is to a skew? And we also have the tip if you're using very carefully. You have to be very gentle with it. But you have this similar mark making abilities. But the other nice thing it is the dark smudgy mark. Now if you hold it down quickly, it will basically brand the wood, which might be something you want to use because it makes nice feathers and add little formers. But to make a dark smudgy line, if you just basically blow on your tip as you drop it, and keep it moving. You get lovely smudgy chocolatey marks. Now I'm not pressing hard at all. You're basically just drawing soft circles and allowing the machine to, the tip to move across the wood, not pressing it into the wood. The more times you go over a mark, the darker it gets. You can build up those marks. It's better to concentrate and build up the marks and put the temperature up too high to begin with. Put the temperature up too high, just turning it up for now. What you get is a lot of carbon buildup. Do you see that? And you get this like really dirty, it's hard to see on there, but you can see how it's damaging the wood rather than creating a mark. That's with the temperature up too high, and that's one of the common mistakes that beginners make. There's a lot of carbon buildup. You also then get a lot of carbon buildup on the bottom of your tip, which then makes you do scratchy, yucky marks. Okay, so with a little bit of practice on the shader, you can make some lovely marks like these. So this is the two different shaders. We've got the flat shader here, and we've got the spoon shaders here. Look how delicate those are, almost like a skew. See that? That's why this guy is my favorite, and he pops up all over the place. You can use a shader to just create simple things like this. This takes about 10 minutes with a shader. So using a shader on the side for the type marks, on the foot and on the top.